Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco, and welcome to my channel. Welcome to my channel. First of all, I want to let you know that this is the first review that I make before the release day, or at least in the release day, of course. I received the CPU before the release date, and for that I want to thank AMD, and I do hope that you really enjoy this content, as I took several days testing all the CPUs that you'll see here in the benchmarks. I actually had results for games that got very little updates, like Starfield for example, but as soon as I started testing the Ryzen 7 9700X and I saw that the previous generation had better results, I thought, shit. So I went to AMD's reviewer guide and checked the BIOS and the chipset driver version that I had to use in order to ensure that the Ryzen 9700X was performing as it should, and everything was fine. So I thought, don't tell me that the game's performance changed with updates. And then started the crusade. The crusade of retesting all the CPUs you see here in this video in games where performance changed, like Starfield, Last of Us, Spider-Man, Microsoft Flight Simulator, in between others. Well, at least you have updated results for all the CPUs. Now, as for Zen 5 and Ryzen 7 9700X, AMD stated they improved several things over Zen 4, like the AVX 512 on 512-bit data path, to increase the throughput of course, or the optimized branch prediction and fetch, and improved L-cache latency and bandwidth. But what does that mean to the end user? Putting this in an easy way, if we compare the Ryzen 7 9700X versus the previous generations, we have the same amount of cores and threads and about the same die size, at least compared to Zen 4 of course. But with an increase on the IMC's native frequency going from DDR5 5200 to DDR5 5600, which is quite nice actually. Although the 9700X also comes with an extremely lower base clock, going from 4.5 GHz on the 7700X to 3.8 GHz on the 7900X of course, and that is most likely due to the improved power with the TDP decrease from 105 to 65 watts, and the PPT, which is the actual amount of power your CPU can use if all the other criteria are met, from 142 to 88 watts. And on top of this, it is released at $359 MSRP compared to the $399 that we saw on the 7700X. So we're supposed to have better performance, better efficiency, and lower MSRP? What about performance then? So we start with the productivity benchmarks, and I have to advise you that you maybe want to put the video in full screen mode because we do have a lot of data here. Oh, but before, let's watch today's sponsor.
GVG Mall!
Bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Photoshop 2024 is mostly single-threaded driven, at least in terms of the budget benchmark, and that's why we see the 7700X outmatching the 7800X 3D by 10%. This happens because the 7800X 3D has lower clock speed to ensure that the 3D cache doesn't melt due to high temperatures. But we all see the 9700X being 9% faster than the 7700X, which is not that much to be honest. On the other hand, Premiere is a more multi-threaded workload, and this is why we have the 7700X matching the 9700X. And you might think, well, this is quite strange. Aren't the new CPUs supposed to be always faster? And you're completely right. What happens here is that, as explained before, the multi-threading power draw on the 9700X at stock is only 61% of the 7700X's one. The 9700X matched the 7700X's performance with only 88 watts instead of 142. And looking things that way, it is quite impressive. As for Blender, the Ryzen 9 7900X 3D is obviously much faster as it features 12 cores and 24 threads, but if we compare the 8-core 16-thread CPUs, which are all the Ryzen 7 CPUs here, we can see that all of them are more or less on par, with the 7700X once again getting an advantage due to its higher power limits, but still losing to the 9700X by a really small margin. Cinebench R24 shows us both single-core and multi-core performances, And looking at the 7800X 3D, you can see that it features the lower single-core results of the 7000 series CPUs because, once again, of lower frequencies, with the 7700X being slightly above it, but being like 14% below the 9700X. That scores up to 137 points. It does catch up in terms of multi-threading though, once again due to higher power limits, but don't worry because we'll have some overclocking results in the end. With 7-zip, we have the 7900X 3D murdering all the other CPUs with its 12 cores, 24 threads configuration, and we now have the 7700X beating the 9700X's performance in both compression and decompression. This shows how much power restricted the 9700X comes at stock when we're talking about multi-threading performance, of course. In terms of overclocking benchmarks that will follow, you'll see exactly that. But well, let's now move to the gaming benchmarks. Starting with Assetto Corsa, you can immediately see how much faster the 12600K is compared to the 5600X, even with DDR4, which is always nice to see. We also have the 7800X 3D obliterating the other CPUs performance-wise, being 19% faster than the 9700X and 20% faster than the 7900X 3D. The 7900X 3D loses a lot of performance here due to having 12 cores, 24 threads on a dual CCD solution, which means that only 6 cores will be able to access the 3D cache, since the 3D cache is only set on one CCD. While with the 7800X 3D's single CCD solution, we have 8 cores accessing the 3DV cache, hence the higher performance. Although the 9700X is 11% faster than the 7700X here, which is far from bad, being also 5% faster than the 5800X 3D in a game that loves cache like this one. And in Modern Warfare 2, I must tell you that I got seriously surprised by the results. Even at 1080p balanced settings with the 7900X TX, most top-tier CPUs were getting GPU bottlenecked in some parts, hence why the 7800X 3D is not much faster than the 9700X and 5800X 3D here. Still, we get some awesome results from all CPUs, with the 7700X delivering some odd results with stock DDR5 timings, and in here the 9700X is again 9% faster than the 7700X and only slightly below the 7000 Series X 3D CPUs. As for Counter-Strike 2, it now uses a Source 2 engine, and that means that the X3D CPUs will benefit as well. But even there, it seems that the double L2 cache on the Ryzen 7000 and 9000 series plays a major role as well, with the 7700X being 7% faster than the 5800X 3D. Something that translates to the 9700X versus 7800X 3D, where we finally see the 9700X being faster. Of course, we're talking about 6 FPS, which means exactly nothing gameplay-wise, but it is still fun to see. As we move to Hogwarts Legacy, we got the same scenario as with Call of Duty, where in some areas of the benchmark, some CPUs like the 9700X and 7800X 3D were getting GPU bottlenecked, meaning that in a non-GPU bottlenecked scenario, they would deliver slightly higher results. Still, we see the 9700X now being 20% faster than the 7700X in this title, getting a massive FPS boost from the tweaked timings, while the 7700X and the other CPUs got only a little boost. And you can trust these results as all of these CPUs were retested in the past few days, so yeah. Moving to Microsoft Flight Simulator, we have the 7800X 3D being 11% faster than the 7900X 3D and 21% faster than the 9700X. That in this game is slower than the 5800X 3D. Somehow, but this game also gives me slightly higher results with the 7600X than the 7700X, after retesting several times. Although you'll see in the overclocking part in this game that the 9700X does get a nice performance boost when raising the power limit. You'll see, wink wink. Banishers Ghosts of New Eden is another insanely heavy title if we're talking about the village areas. I mean, it's Unreal Engine 5. In those areas, the 3D cache of the AMD CPUs delivers a major uplift, with the 5800X 3D being 11% faster than the 7700X, and with the 7800X 3D being 9% faster than the 9700X. And this game loves the extra cache so much that even the 7900X 3D, outperforms the 9700X by a little, and a shout out to the 12600K that performed much better than the 5600X here as well. As for Hitman 3, I am running the benchmark tool, as it, due to physics, is really CPU heavy in some parts, where we see the 12600K once again outmatching the 5600X by quite a lot, and with the 7800X 3D being a whopping 18% faster than the 9700X that matches the 7900X 3D in this title. Well, it is what it is, I guess. Moving to Starfield, we have some very interesting results, and you might ask, Fabio, interesting how? Interesting because even though the majority of the results are more or less on par with what we saw before, the 7700X is now faster than the 9700X. And that happens once again due to power limitations, because this game will really crush your CPU, and while the 9700X was pushing a max of 88 watts, the 7700X was constantly at around 120, sometimes even more, hence the higher frequencies that possibly led to these results. And The Last of Us shows us exactly the same. This game is also very CPU demanding if you're aiming for those high FPS numbers, and this is why you see the 7700X oddly close to the 9700X here. Power limitations. Although I must say that even running at 1080p high settings with the 7900X TX, the 7800X 3D did face kind of a little GPU bottleneck in some parts of the benchmark, meaning that the overall results would be slightly higher for these CPUs if we were running, let's say, an RTX 4090. Far Cry 6 is always a great benchmark for CPUs, and that's why I love including it. And it also loves 3D cache, but not as much as some previous titles. In here, the 7700X basically matches the 5800X 3D, and the 9700X gets beaten by the 7800X 3D. Not even matching the 7900X 3D that performs quite well in this title too. Comparing non-X 3D versus non-X 3D, we have the 9700X beating the 7700X by 10%. And it seems that apart from some outliers, that's where the 9700X sits, around 10% faster than the 7700X. This at stock, of course. Spider-Man is the first game that I tested that really works well with a dual CCD configuration on the 7900X 3D. That here performs slightly worse than the 7800X 3D in terms of averages, but delivers higher 1% lows. In here, the 9700X is 19% faster than the 7700X with tweaked timings, and I'm showing these results because almost anyone with Hynix dies on their RAM, which are the vast majority of DDR5 kits, can copy these simple tweaked timings and make their CPUs run like this or perform like this. And as we enable ray tracing, the dual CCD configuration on the 7900X 3D helps a lot due to the extra bandwidth, being now the fastest CPU, beating the 7800X 3D by 8%, and with the 9700X being only 6% faster than the 7700X. Interesting. And now bringing Total War Warhammer 3 with a battle benchmark, and almost every single CPU was able to be bottlenecked by the GPU here, meaning that the game is kind of well optimized. What does change are the 1% lows that get higher with better CPUs, of course. The difference is not that big though, at least not in this scenario. As you saw, the Ryzen 7 9700X's performance isn't bad by any means, sometimes getting really close to the 7800X 3D in terms of performance, sometimes being, well, just closer to the non-X 3D variants. But what about overclocking? Because as you saw, the Ryzen 7 9700X comes severely power restricted if you compare it to the 7700X, for example. Let's start with 7-zip, where the 7700X outmatched the 9700X before, but as soon as we apply a simple tweak on the 7900X, it levels the fields in terms of decompression and outmatches it in terms of compression, while of course still consuming slightly less power. And the same thing goes for Blender, where the 9700X was roughly faster than the 7700X, but as soon as we overclock both, the 7700X got a small performance increase, but the 9700X got a big one, now being 9% faster than the 7700X. And if you're thinking about, well, you made a static overclock for the 7700X and you're using a curve optimizer for the 9700X, and that's unfair. Well, it actually isn't, as I tested before and even made a video about it, testing curve optimizer versus static overclock on my 7700X. And in terms of the overall performance, the results were that the static overclocking was virtually equal to the curve optimizer while consuming way less power. Something we'll see soon as well. As for Cinebench, we can also see how power restricted the 9700X was compared to the 7700X. That also got an increase in multi-threading score, but 2 points less in the single core. The 9700X on the other hand got 2 points more in single core and a huge boost in terms of multi-core, making it go from sweating my ass off to beat the previous generation to at least beating the previous generation while sweating my ass off, but now by 8%. Microsoft Flight Simulator also pushes the CPU a lot, but the Ryzen 7 7700X was almost maxed out as the bigger gains when overclocking were in the 1% lows. As for the 9700X, we got a decent 7% uplift, making it now 12% faster than the 7700X in this title. And The Last of Us seems even more interesting as it seems to care a lot about frequency, and with the mild overclock I made to the 9700X, it actually surpassed the 7800X 3D here, which is quite a feat. Very interesting results. As for Starfield, as soon as we took off the 9700X's chains, it immediately went up to the 7700X level, which is not a big uplift, but I guess we could push it even more if we raised the power limits to 140 watts, for example. But I just wanted to show you the results here, still not faster than the 7700X. As for Spider-Man, things don't change much for the CPUs when running the game normally per se, but as soon as we enable ray tracing, the 9700X gains a bit of performance, around 4%, while the 7700X gets nothing in return but power efficiency and temperatures, being the 7900X 3D the best CPU here, of course. And finally, going to the averages, we have the base 7700X running Expo Profile as our performance floor. If we compare base versus base, the 9700X is still around 10% faster, which is not much to be honest, but considering it generally consumes less power and comes at a lower MSRP, it is okay, I guess. Now, if we compare OC versus OC, we can get the 9700X to perform, well, around 19% faster than the base 7700X and 12% faster with both overclocked. And believe me when I say this, I could have pushed the 9700X further, but I limited it to around 120 watts. If I wanted to go to, let's say, 140 watts, for example, it would be faster in some games as well. And in case you were curious, well, you can see the average results of the lower-end CPUs as well, with the 12600K being faster than the 5600X, and the 7600X outmatching the 5700X 3D by a little. Really awesome results for what it costs. And to really finish the results, we have the power draw. And these charts are a bit confusing even to me, and Excel keeps doing a sum of at least two axes together, so some bars size might be misleading due to that. So use full screen mode and focus on the numbers if you can. Silver or gray is the idle power draw, black the single core power draw, and orange or blue indicate the multi-core power draw. And as you can see, comparing 7700X stock versus 9700X stock, the 7700X goes up to 50 watts while in single core and 134 watts in multi-core, while the 9700X was consuming 42 watts single core and 88 watts multi-core. Now, when both are tweaked, the tables actually turn, and the 9700X still consumes less in single core, but more in multi-core now, although it is like 7 watts more, which doesn't really mean anything. And if you were to make a static overclock for the 9700X, the power efficiency would get even better, while also having better multi-core results. But the overall gaming performance would only, well, slightly improve, hence why I went with Curve Optimizer here. And of course, a shout out to the 7800X 3D that was consuming less power than the 5800X 3D while being the best performer in terms of gaming. But well, all said and done, let's move to the conclusion. And well people, as you saw, overclocking the Ryzen 7 9700X did help in some titles, making it actually a decent contender compared to the options that we have right now, of course, especially for people looking to build a new computer, I mean. But AMD did put it in a very odd position. For $299 you have the Ryzen 7 7700X, which even stock versus stock will be decently close to the 9700X, but consuming a bit more power. For $379, which is around $16 over the 9700X's MSRP, well, you get the best gaming performance from AMD while consuming less power. And for $36 over the 9700X, you get the 7900X 3D that performs roughly the same as the 9700X overall, but delivers a much better performance in terms of productivity due to its 12 cores 24 threads configuration. Meaning that if you get a 9700X, you get a CPU that is more expensive than the 7700X, but at the same time is faster.
Thank you, kind sir.
But for roughly the same price, you can get the 7800X 3D that is way better in gaming, consumes less power, but is slower in productivity. And for $40 more or something like that, you can actually get the 7900X 3D that performs roughly the same as the 9700X in terms of gaming, but performs much better in terms of productivity, and of course also consumes more power. I believe this is really messy for people looking to buy or to build a new computer, people that are not tech savvy, I believe that's how it's pronounced, people that are not much into tech, and that might actually confuse them a lot in between which one they should get, 7700X, 9700X, then we have the X3D version, 7800X 3D, 7900X 3D, and all priced in between, let's say $60 from one to each other. I mean, with the 7700X being considerably cheaper than the 7900X 3D, of course, around $100, but even then, the price difference is not that big. So for people looking to upgrade or build new computers that don't really know about the market and how things perform, yeah, it might be confusing, and that's why I'm happy to bring you this video today. English is like kicking me in the face and in the gut, and yeah, I mean, Shakespeare is like in his coffin. What I mean is that none of these picks are actually bad here, it all comes to what you want or need. If you want something that still performs very well in terms of gaming and destroys everything in this price tag in terms of productivity, you want the 7900X 3D. If you want a cheaper one, just more focused in gaming, maybe with a bit of productivity, you want the 7800X 3D. And if you want the balance in between all of them, well, then you do get the 9700X. Especially if you are looking, or if you have a higher frequency kit, if you want to maybe get an X890 motherboard later and push those RAM frequencies higher, the FCLK higher, if you want that, the 9700X is the way to go. If you just want a cheap version of the 9700X that still performs well but consumes a bit more power, then you have the 7700X. It is what it is. And well guys, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video, that really helps a lot. By the way, once again, thanks AMD for sending the CPU. I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe they'll send the Ryzen 9 9900X and the 9950X as well. And that's actually pretty good because since I now made all the retests and so on, I can actually just test those CPUs, make the videos. I already have the charts, everything is ready to work, but they were several days working my ass off to make this work today, to make this happen today. So thank you very I'm even stuttering. Thank you very much for watching the video, and leave your comment in the comment section because that also helps a lot. And even if you don't actually buy anything from our sponsor, just go open the links because as usual it does help. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in the next video as well. Cheers.